Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The Native American Supernatural Truth. Okay guys, I don't know how to green text, so bear with me and get over it. I'm on my phone, so responding may be delayed, but I'll do my best. So I'm a member of the Sklallam tribe on an island just outside of Seattle, Washington. Growing up, my mother had told me how she was a direct descendant of Chief Seattle, which meant I had very important blood running through my veins. While I never could actually prove, I always thought it was kind of cool. Me being a descendant of an actual Indian chief, I felt special. So on the regular, my family and I would go down to the water and make a fire, camp out, drink and smoke. We always had a great time around there. Well, in my early 20s after graduating high school, it was rare that I would have a chance to come home, much less enjoy the little adventure of a night on the beach just bullshitting. Anyway, I'm home from college for a week and the whole atmosphere of my family home just seemed off somehow. Like all the joy and belonging was just gone. Imagine coming home to your family after not seeing them for months and only speaking with them occasionally. They would welcome you with open arms and excitement, right? Well, as soon as I walked in and saw my brother, who was the only one home at the time, I felt an uneasiness I've never felt before. Like the boy I grew up with was a stranger. Of course, the first thing I thought was he's just a typical teenager who doesn't have time for his brother anymore. I brushed the feeling off as nothing more than homesickness subsiding or something. Keep in mind, I haven't been home in almost 6 months at this point, and I was attending Washington State University, which is almost a 5-hour drive from the island. So I walked up to my brother, Brian. He looks at me and in a very hostile tone just says, "What?" He was never all that rude growing up. And even though the 7-year age gap was enough for us to not share much in common, we were always friendly towards each other for the most part. So I asked Brian where our parents were and he just stares at me for a moment like a stunned deer. As I started to feel that sense of uneasiness creep up on me again, he just replied saying not home. I asked him if he knew if we were going camping on the water this weekend, and he snapped his head back to me with this look of almost pure repulsion. He literally looked like he smelled a 2-week-old pile of rotting raccoon assholes baking in the sun. He just said, "Mom said we aren't allowed to camp out there anymore," and snapped his attention back to the TV. While I thought his behavior was off even for him being the hormonal teenager he was, I shrugged it off and headed down the hall to unpack some stuff. The next day was rather uneventful aside from the huge welcome home seafood dinner my parents cooked up that night and Brian's continued distracted behavior. So Saturday rolls around and we're sitting in the living room playing poker when I decided to ask my mom why we weren't allowed to camp down at the waterfront anymore, thinking it would have been some asinine new tribal law. She stopped what she was doing immediately and looked at my brother with genuine fear in her eyes. "What?" I asked. Now, my mother grew up Christian and her faith in God was strong, and she never seemed the type to fear the things that man can conjure up in its twisted mind. But the supernatural was a bit of a taboo subject. Ouija boards, mirror games, all of it. She never allowed us to screw around with these things. My mother may be a level-headed woman, but the supernatural has always unnerved her. My mother looked at Brian for a solid 15 to 20 seconds before asking me what he told me. I just told her he hadn't really said much honestly about anything. Okay guys, so this is where my part of the story ends for now, and this is from the perspective of my brother and parents. My mom started to tell me about the last time they all went camping, and the events leading to why we couldn't stay out there anymore. Apparently Brian had been on winter break just a couple months prior to my visit home and was doing the usual campfire beer and weed weekend party at the water edge. I'll try to give a little description of the area. The road to get down to the water is about 2 or 3 miles long and mostly just big trees with the occasional house on the edge. Once the trees break, there's about a mile radius of just sandbars, a few docks and a ton of driftwood. This is where we camped the majority of our life. So he's sitting there doing his thing in a group of about 5 or 6 others. Now, from the way my mom tells it, they were partying pretty late into the night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. As everyone was slipping into their tents, my brother had apparently seen a bit of rustling over in between the tree line and the campsite. She said how he told her he could swear he saw the driftwood moving and rattling around a bit. But he had admitted he was too drunk and high to know for sure. But he felt uneasy anyway. About an hour later, he had heard slow, heavy footsteps just outside the tents and a low, raspy, wheezing sound. Our home is probably about 5 miles or so away, so driving there takes roughly 15 minutes, give or take. So my brother, somewhat spooked, got on his phone and called my mom. Agitated to get a call so late at night, she had answered more annoyed than anything. She asked Brian what he wanted, and as he said he wanted to be picked up because he's drunk and can't drive, she agreed. Now, like I said, it takes roughly 15 minutes to drive there, and my brother knew that. He had started to become more and more uneasy and woke up the other 2 kids in the tent. As he did, a loud snapping sound came from outside the tent, maybe 20 feet or so away. Then a large piece of driftwood hit one of his friends through the tent right in her back. He said that the bruise that was left on her was huge when he saw it a few days later. This freaked them all out, and everyone started screaming and trying to call their parents in 911. The kids in the other tent woke up and started shouting and asking what happened. Apparently nobody wanted to get out and see what was going on. A few minutes passed before a low-toned but very loud moan came from outside. He described it as if a whale was speaking but mixed with a bear's growl. So at this point in the story, I figured that they had just been screwing with me and were trying to set something up for when we actually do end up going camping. I didn't want to buy into all the spooky stuff, but I was genuinely interested in hearing the rest. But then that weird feeling I had when I walked in the door suddenly came back. That feeling of dread. So back to the story. Brian had heard that low moan and lost his mind. He grabbed the only thing he could defend himself with, which was an oyster knife. And he just sat there waiting for either the sounds to come back or my mother to show up. He said there was suddenly no sound in the area, besides the breathing and soft crying of the others in the tent. A few minutes go by and then he hears the crunch of rocks in an engine. His phone went off and he jumped a bit and answered it. My mom had told him she's here and to start packing up while she shined the brights on the area. Almost immediately, he opened the tent and shot out towards the car with the other kids, just leaving everything at the site. As they drove home, he told my mom about what happened and the weird noises they heard. So they got home, and understandably he couldn't sleep given the events he just witnessed, finally nodding off around 7 in the morning. Now that was kinda creepy, I thought, but again I figured this was to be an elaborate setup to get under my skin. But the really weird part came after, in the weeks and months to follow. Brian had seen very subtle movements outside the house in the corner of his eye. They would never seem to be in his line of sight, and when he looked to see what it would be gone. He said he would always feel afraid when he was outside, and the dark had been making him more and more uncomfortable. Eventually, his sleep habits had started to suffer, and the shadows he caught in the corner of his eye showed up more frequently. Fast forward a couple months, and that's when I show up. So I'm sitting there listening to my family talk about these events, trying my best to play along and pretend like I'm into it. Then my mom described what the being or creature was. She had said that it's not the first time she's heard about this situation. When she was a little girl, her grandmother told her stories of a creature, or more accurately, like a presence that would sit on the edge of the woods and was there, but not there. A shadow that was most likely malevolent in nature and would feed on the negative emotions of people. Their sadness, their anxiety, and of course their fear. She described it as being shapeless and without form, but still huge and menacing. It would play tricks on a person or small group of people while they were away from others. It would make them feel alone and hopeless and then draw on those negative emotions. Once it had pretty, it would hunt them, following them around and making sure they basically feel like crap all the time. So at this point, the hair on my arms and neck stood up and that feeling of dread came back. And I honestly felt that what my mom told me was true. I looked at my brother and he looked so drained. I feel as if the entity had been specifically targeting him for some reason. It's been 5 years since then, and my little brother's life has gone to hell. Developed a drug habit, lost his first child to stillbirth, has been in and out of jail over the years. Now, like I said before, my mom has never wanted us to mess with the paranormal, and I can definitely see why. But there has to be something I can do to help him in some way. Do any of you know what this entity could be? It obviously seems like it's targeting him, and I have no clue where to start. Is this just a string of bad luck for him, or is it actually supernatural?
Drug addict, messed up sleep cycle, hallucinating.
Keep in mind, the addiction didn't start right away. He was dealing with this for almost 2 years before he hit the hard stuff. Not to mention the fact that I had felt super uneasy around him. OP here. Did a little digging on my tribe's folklore, and what I've found is limited at best. It's only somewhat on par with what happened, but it's the best I can do for now. The basket ogress is a marauding giant common to the folklore of many Northwest Coast tribes. She catches humans, especially naughty or careless children, and carries them off in her enormous pack basket to eat them in her lair. Luckily, she is rather dim-witted and her prey usually manages to escape. Although there are some Northwest Coast legends where Basket Woman has a greater mythological importance, in most tribes she primarily plays the role of a boogeyman and fairy tale adversary.
Another native here. I've seen this kind of thing before, as well as heard a bunch of similar stories. It's not easy to get rid of something like that. As dumb as it may sound, prayers help. I would recommend speaking to one of your tribal elders and seeking help from them. But half the problem is that, for my people anyway, you usually have to seek help yourself. You can't usually intercede without first being asked for help. I hope it gets better for you and your family. Also, be super careful about the types of medicine you use. It may cause more harm than good.
I've been lurking on /x/ for a little while now and thought I'd share a personal story of mine. This story means more to me than I actually want it to. I was like 9 or 10 years old. We lived in a town in an Indian reservation that was right on the Mexican border called Fort Yuma, Quechan Reservation. My whole family lives there, including my ancient grandpa, who is full-blooded Apache, and madder than hell. Now I usually don't consider myself a native due to the fact that I have light skin and am a mix of different tribes. This whole mix thing wouldn't be a problem if I wasn't 1/4 Apache and 1/16 Navajo with a little bit of Cherokee and Flathead in there too. So, in a nutshell, the kids on the res weren't very nice to me. It was Quechan territory. I started to hate my heritage over time. We moved up to Montana because parents can't keep themselves together. Fast forward like 7 years. I planning on going to college at the University of Phoenix. Decide I'd stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while until I got everything set up with college. Grandpa doesn't say much to me until one night when he started going off about his heritage. Tells me I should be proud of being an Apache, a warrior. I tell him I've lost my heritage and tells him sob story from childhood at the res. He just kind of sits there and stares at me. Nods his head once and says he'll show me that no matter what mix of tribe I am, I'll have native in my blood and I should be proud, and he'll show me how. So me and Gramps start hanging out daily, and it's really cool. We go to a cool American Indian museum, shop at those cool stores that are still kind of like trading posts. Just really fun stuff. So I start thinking maybe I should be a little more proud of my heritage. So it's been a few weeks after hanging out with Gramps for 2 or 3 days. He decides we should go on a road trip up north to show me where he grew up as a child. I didn't really want to go. I mean, I was doing all this school paperwork, and I wanted to get in ASAP so I could get my classes. Decide Gramps may not have very many years left, and this may be the last to go do something with him like this with him. So I agreed, and the next we're off for Chinle, Arizona. The town is small. Gramps drove for an additional 20 miles down a gravel road that eventually turned to dirt. And finally we made a small clay house. No electricity, no running water, nothing. Gramps gets out and starts heading towards it. Get out and start following him. Just before Gramps gets to the door, it creaks open. We both stop. He yells out, "Is somebody living here?" My name is Anon, and my parents built this house before I was born. A small little Indian woman poked her head out. She looked like she was 500 years old. "You're that Anon boy, aren't you?" She had really dry, cracking voice. "Yes, ma'am." Grandpa had a really confused look on his face. She asked us to come in, and we refused at first. I thought she was creepy. Gramps just didn't want to be rude. She insists. So we walk in, and the first thing I notice is a foul smell, like somebody has been using the bathroom in a corner of this house. She sprinkles white dust all over the floor. Gramps and the old lady start talking about native legends and about the house. It seemed like we were there for hours. Before we knew it, it was night. "Whoa," Grandpa said, realizing it was pitch black outside. "Looks like I lost track of time. Sorry about that, Anon." Didn't care. Just glad we were leaving. The old lady gives me a strange look as we leave, as if she noticed something. Maybe the similarities between me and Gramps. I didn't think much about it and started heading down the road back to town. It's dark and quiet up until Gramps starts muttering to himself. I ask what's wrong, and he replies, "We should have hit the highway by now, but we haven't got off the dirt road yet." Confused, he pulls over and looks at the map. I pull Google Maps up on my phone, and it says we're still on reservation. Show Gramps. He looks at the map and starts scratching his head and looks around in confusion until his face turns white and he stares off into the distance. I try to see whatever he's looking at and notice it as a little clay house. I ask him if it's the same one. He says no and tells me to get in. I jump into the truck and he guns it. I was starting to get a little scared just because Gramps was freaking out. Take my eyes off the road for a split second, and Gramps slams on the brakes. I looked up to see what he almost hit. No way. It's a little clay house. Gramps sits there for a second, headlights beaming in the round holes that were used as windows. Maybe somebody's been out here building replicas of old clay houses. Gramps didn't say a word. He just looks at me and says, "Whatever you do, don't leave the truck." I just nod and he gets out and walks up to the house. I'm at max fear level. Gramps knocks on the door. "Que pura?" Nothing. Gramps keeps knocking and yelling. Suddenly an old woman peeks her head out. Her Gramps look like they're talking normally. Gramps walks in and never walks out. I eventually fell asleep in the truck. Wake up to someone shaking me. It's Gramps with a couple of tribal police officers and he's freaking out, saying I took off in his truck and left him out at the old clay house. Told him what happened and he just looked at me with this terrified look on his face. Told me that the old woman was his mom who died due to massive tumors in her brain. He said she believes that she rides on the same saddle as the Star People and that she was actually a Yenaldlushi, a type of witch, or a shapeshifter. So needless to say, I'm not too crazy about my heritage again.
I've got an incident of hearing drumming in the woods. To this day, one of the oddest occurrences I've ever experienced. In the summer of 2014, my girlfriend at the time and I decided to go geocaching. I'd gone out a few times before with friends and really enjoyed it. She was new to the whole concept, so I looked up a geocache close by, logged the coordinates into my GPS, and off we went. This geocache took us out into the state game lands in western Pennsylvania, so we parked in a designated parking lot and began our hike into the woods. It was the afternoon of a hot and humid Pennsylvania day, and the location was only supposed to be about half a mile from the car. As we were following the GPS down a clearing with woods about 100 feet to either side of us, we began to hear drumming to our left. Kind of far off, but it still seemed like we should be able to see the origin of the sound. I asked if she heard it too, which thankfully she did. We both thought it was pretty strange, but after about 10 seconds it faded out and we began our search again. After walking about 50 yards further, the drumming returned, louder this time. It sounded like Native American war drums. We stopped and peered into the woods. We saw absolutely nothing. The only excuse I could think of is that maybe there's a Boy Scout camp nearby, which is a flimsy explanation at best. We listened for a few seconds, then I grabbed her hand, did a 180, and power walked back through the clearing, the drums fading with every step. We didn't say anything to each other on the hike back, just got in the car and left. As we drove down the dirt back road lined with trees, I looked for anything that could be the source of the drumming. There wasn't another living soul in the area until we reached the main highway.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.